As was mentioned earlier, React is, this is going to be a bit more of a technology talk than some of the talks that we're maybe used to here. React is a library by Facebook that I'm really excited about. So I have to start off my talk with like a picture of my family. So I have 3 amazing daughters. One of the things as a technologist that like is really important to me is that my kids grow up with like a love of technology. And so we do Halloween costumes every year. And this was my 5-year-old's idea. So I was pretty excited to see it come to life here. But this is a working Amazon Echo. And this was a lot of fun because we took it to our local library's costume competition. And you have like a million little kids asking it to play like Sandstorm by Darude is kind of in the library. It's pretty exciting. I run a company called Spaceship Studio. We help startups, other companies, and so on and so forth, kind of with like front-end projects and mobile projects. It's a lot of fun, primarily using like React technologies. So I'm going to be calling these React applications. They're not necessarily applications per se. They're applications that are built with React in some way, shape, or form. And it's really just JavaScript in most cases. So for the sake of tonight, we're going to be talking about React applications as just something that's an abstraction on top of JavaScript. Some people love JavaScript. Other people don't like it as much. I love JavaScript. Some people jokingly say it was the best language ever made in 10 days. And then some people even take to Twitter and like post jokes like this. Here's the definitive guide of JavaScript, and then the good parts. So good to know. But I'm really big on JavaScript. I love JavaScript. And some people might be asking, why JavaScript? We have a bunch of other languages and things that we can do. So kind of to start off our talk about React, I kind of want to talk about JavaScript first, just lightly. JavaScript is available on all kinds of platforms. It's available on hardware. Like if you're building like IoT devices, a lot of times you're using JavaScript. Mobile applications to computers and standard like web, where we are used to seeing JavaScript. So much so that one of the people who really, I think, wasn't a big fan of JavaScript initially said, like, look, this is the language that, it's the ubiquitous language for computing right now. Not saying it's the only one, but pretty much if we want to write code on any platform, for the most part, JavaScript is there. This is a chart that kind of like fits the narrative I'm trying to propose. This isn't like the only say on what programming languages are popular. But if we see here, this pink line here, that's JavaScript. This is from Stack Overflow. There's other sources that say Java is the most used programming language. But again, trying to make the visuals fit the narrative I'm trying to portray here. But regardless, JavaScript is pretty widely used. But then why React? So here we have some logos from just some of the other libraries and frameworks that we may have. Some of these are used together, some of them not so much. But why React? Well, kind of like JavaScript, React is available on a lot of different platforms. So React is available for the web, some browser logos. We're going to take a look at a couple of these things as well. React is also available on native platforms, so Android and iOS. Can do command line apps with React. If I have time left at the end, we'll come back and watch this animated GIF over and over. But it's pretty neat that we can build an app for a command line with React. We can build Xbox One applications and Windows Universal apps. And even VR apps. And we're going to take a look at some VR apps in a little bit as well. Or one app, not plural. But and I just had to put this like stock photo because I don't know, a lot of times like seeing people using VR devices looks kind of hilarious without like knowing why. But yeah, so you can build apps for that platform. And this is from Hacker News just today. There was a discussion about where React is. So the ones that I'm highlighting are just a small subset of all the places that we can use React. So you'll see here there's VR, AR, Mac OS, Windows, just to name a few, Sketch apps. So if there are any designers, you can actually build applications and things in React that'll render to Sketch, which is really, really neat. But before we dive into the cool stuff, I think we should talk about React first, instead of, here's some implementations of using React. So as I just said here, a little bit on React. So with React, I hope you can't tell I photoshopped this. Everything, for the most part, is a component. And for the sake of this example, there's some other things in the ecosystem. But we're going to be talking about components. And what a component is just a small piece of an application. This isn't unique to React. There's other things that in programming where we use components. But React is all about components. So we can think of an application as just the subset of various individual parts. So I like to think of components as like Lego blocks. So there's a very specific, this block is a blue block that has this many pieces on it. We could build something out of this, but we could also have other blocks that we'd use in concert with this one. And we could build something small, hey, cool, or even giant cities of reusable components, or Legos as the case may be in this picture. But so for like a traditional application, this is the to-do MVC application, just a screenshot of that. We could break this down into a series of components. We could have a heading component, a component for each of the list items. We could break this down even further. Like we have some for the buttons. So we could actually make a component just for this check mark here and just the list item text as well. So that's how we can break an application down. So each of the components is responsible for a very specific thing, but together we build an application out of it. So in React, components are derived from two things mainly, state and props. And we're going to dive in a little bit more about what these are. But props, these are the parameters that we're giving to a React component. So I like to think of them a lot of times where, I know we were talking about there wouldn't be math, but surprise. So we can say, like a math equation where we say f of x equals y. We can think of x as the props to a component. So like here, we could say f of props, and we get some HTML as output. So something that we're going to render to a browser. So f of, so we can actually write a JavaScript function called greet. And this is a valid React component. So we're building a function, and we say, I'm going to give it some properties called props. And one of these properties is going to be props.name. So we're rendering a standard h1 tag, which is a heading text. And we're going to say, when I receive properties, the output to the browser should be a heading that has hi props.name. We're going to see an example in just a minute. But oftentimes, this says class. We're cutting off some of the text here. But we can say, with React, there's an API as well. So we can use base JavaScript functions, or we can use this API that comes with React, which is a JavaScript class. And using this render method, this is part of the React API. And again, this is something that, just to kind of highlight over, it's not something that I think, if you didn't come in knowing JavaScript classes, it's probably not something that is going to be covered in too much detail tonight. But something to be aware of, React has an API that is very nice to work with. And one of the methods that we get here is render that says, when I show this component, the output of this component is coming from this function called render. So kind of where we had a JavaScript function before, we are just saying render h1 hi this.props.name. And we don't need to treat it as a function anymore. And we'll see how we can actually interact with this in just a second. State for a React component is kind of the internal properties that only the component cares about. So when I try to explain components like without code or without anything like that, a lot of times I think of kind of like an alarm clock. So the alarm clock is managing time. You don't have to say, now the time is this, now the time is this. The clock knows how to do that. That would be, if this was a React component, knowing how the time gets updated on the screen, that would be state, something internal. Props would be if I'm setting the clock to be a specific time. That would be input to this component, and so therefore would be props. So let's look at some of the examples here. Initially here, we're going to look at the web version, because this is the quickest and easiest way to get in React if anybody is interested. This is CodePen. This is an amazing site for just kind of playing around with a technology that's a web-based one. You'll see here we have some places where we can render HTML and CSS and JavaScript. So the main focus here is going to be the JavaScript, but I do want to call this out initially. We do have to create an HTML element. We're creating a div with an ID of app. And we're going to tell React to say, again, this isn't something that is a detail that I think people should have as a takeaway, but I just kind of want to explain it as we're talking about it here. We're telling React to render our React application, which we'll see in just a second, into our HTML here. We're telling JavaScript to say, go render this application now into our HTML. So let me see, I'll make this a little bit bigger. So the main thing that we're going to focus on here is we have a message component. In our message component, we're tracking both whether or not the component itself has been clicked, and we're as state. So we have this state clicked equals false. We render some HTML with some styling. We're going to say if the background color, if the state is clicked, the background color will be a kind of greenish color. And if not, the background will be white. And then we render some HTML for a heading and then a paragraph tag, and we say, what's up, and then the name that we're given as a prop. So, and then when we click on this button, we're saying call this method that says I've been clicked, and that calls set state clicked true. And what this does is this is a React thing that says this is something that internally happens. Other props in the application, the global application, don't really care too much about that. But within the component, I care to know whether or not this state has been, this item has been clicked. So from there, let's see this in action. I will say we are creating another component called app that just is a container for our various message components. Whoops. This is why I don't do live coding. If you can see me trying to highlight one line, imagine me trying to type all this. So if we click here, we get green. You'll notice here we have another one, and the state for our previous one actually was the only thing that was updated. So it doesn't get outside of the individual component. The state is local to that component. So, and then we could actually, said I don't live code, but you know what? We'll just do one line here just for, the thing that's really nice about components now is if we want to have some kind of reusable functionality that we're building into our application, we can do that with a component. And then just like that, I mean, this is a very contrived example, but we can replace this really easy without doing a lot of work. So that's the web version of React. Now the thing that's nice is, as we talked about, this is available for multiple platforms. So this is my favorite placeholder image service. It's called like philmurray.com, and it just fills in the thing with pictures of Bill Murray. There's also PlaceCage as well, as if you'd rather do Nicolas Cage images. But I don't know, if you're working on a product, though, you might want to be a little careful about making sure you don't accidentally ship with like Bill Murray or Nicolas Cage pictures. So unless that's what your app is about, then go for it. But so to kind of take a look at this, the thing that's awesome about this is one of the things I love about it, is, so you'll notice here, this application that we're running in the simulator, it is a fully native application. So there's a lot of applications where they're wrapped up as an HTML page in a mobile shell. This React Native actually is running something kind of clever that translates JavaScript into native code for Android or iOS. You'll see here, if you're familiar with HTML, this code might look pretty familiar. It looks just like HTML and standard React, right? And so you'll see here we're doing the same thing where we're saying I have a class that extends React component. I have a render method and some React code called JSX that basically is saying this is what should be rendered. And same deal, if I wanted to add another list item, this has a much more web-like workflow. A lot of times when building like a native application, when you hit save, sometimes you have to compile depending on the context. With React Native, you almost never have to compile. Now there's a way to interact with actual native modules, and a lot of times in those cases you will have to recompile, but this workflow is really fast. The other thing that's cool about this is if you're familiar with web development, I can say toggle this element inspector, okay? I can click on something and it'll show me some information about the individual element that I just selected. So I can say, okay, I know that the color is this. I get some metrics on the height and width and everything like that. This is invaluable information when building an application, when it's like, okay, why isn't this thing looking like I want it to? Especially when you're targeting different device sizes and things like that. The other thing that's really cool about this is you can debug your native application just like you would a web application. So this is the React Native debugger. So I can open up the Chrome inspector so that if I was building a web page, I could debug the web page using my browser. And I can use this to debug the mobile application, which is really, really nice. Now, I'm not going to bore everybody with that today, but it's a really nice thing to know that you can do that. So if you're familiar with one platform, you can be pretty productive on two. All right. The last example that I wanted to show everybody tonight, React is developed by Facebook. I didn't talk about this too much, but they are pretty invested in the ecosystem, and they built it initially for Facebook. So Facebook also owns a VR company called Oculus, if some of you may be familiar with this. So there's a compile target of React that is for building VR applications. I wanted to bring a headset with me tonight, but I thought that might look kind of silly if I'm up here like, all right, everybody, I can see some neat things. But we're going to be using some web VR. And before I do that, I just want to show real quick. This is using React VR. And so I've started off mostly doing web development. I don't do any kind of 3D programming, like GL, anything. I've never built video games or anything like that. And this platform, you'll see here, this looks very HTML-like. And if we're familiar with React on the web, we're familiar with it on native and also VR. So this code, again, we're not going to dive into like what all the code's doing. Is just very, very similar to the React examples that we've seen so far. So this is a web VR app we're going to take a look at. You can see here, if I was wearing a headset, we could be looking around. So pretend, for the sake of this example, let's pretend that we're a building contractor and we wanted to share with the people who are actually like doing the work that this is how things should go. I'm not going to be on site, but we want to make this work. And we want to give everybody a visual because a picture's worth 1,000 words, but actually being able to kind of really see it is great. So what we're going to do here is we're going to pretend like, okay, we're doing this kitchen remodel here on this building, and we can say, look, I click on this and this thing shows up. Click on this, it goes away. This is all derived from state. So that same thing that we saw earlier in a really simple example is this same, is driving this VR application as well. So same deal here. We built one component, and we're telling it to go to different coordinates within our, in our application. So here we say, here's the main kitchen area. The rest of the kitchen should go here. We can look up and say, paint this pink. This should be gray. I was showing somebody changing it. We'll change it back to gray here. So again, just like a very one development paradigm, and we can hit multiple targets. So I just changed that property from pink to gray, and we'll see here. We have this paint this gray. So this works with the headset and everything. It's pretty interesting that this works. Now, John Carmack is somebody who's pretty well known in like the video games industry as somebody who developed like Doom and Quake and things. I don't know if he said this as John Carmack, like video game programmer, or John Carmack, Facebook employee through Oculus. But he was saying that React VR has allowed for some productivity gains that he wasn't seeing in some other platforms. So his words on VR and 3D programming kind of carry a lot of weight, at least for me. And there's a lot that we're not talking about in this right now. You can actually put in 3D models and do other things like this. This is just like a panoramic image with some React components. But the 3D models that we'd be using are also just components. So that slide where we had the everything as a component, that really is how we can think about this. So everything that happens in our application would be through a component. All right. So kind of feels silly going back to the slides just for this, but this is all I've had for tonight. But I would love to take any questions or chat afterwards if anybody wants to talk more about React. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming out.